Former Ole Miss Rebel Chris Graves Jr. is the latest addition to Missouri's cornerback room. And when it comes to the secondary, I really like what Missouri has done with the place.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And once again, Dennis Gates and his squad were doomed by a slow start to the basketball game offensively. Really a dreadful start. Quite honestly, we're going to get into last night's game against Georgia last night. Also, I feel like Mizzou football has closed rather well in the portal. I want to talk about that and all of its strategy leading up to this moment in time. Also want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And indeed, I do want to start this program by talking about Chris Graves Jr. I think is going to be another great option for Missouri in the secondary at the cornerback position in particular. Played in all 15 games last season during the Rebels' run to the semifinals with 9 starts, by the way, among that experience, and with more than 1,000 snaps, by the way, in his career played. He looks like he's going to have probably the most experience of all of those additions and should have just one season, that 2026 season, left to play for the Tigers. And by the way, with Graves already, just a lot of good options from big-time programs who were in the playoff or pretty darn close here recently, including Oregon's Jaleel Florence and also Sione Laulea from Oregon as well. Now Graves plus Elijah Dotson from Michigan, who may be corner or a safety. I think Missouri, correct me if I'm wrong for all you sleuths out there, but I believe Missouri is recruiting him as a corner. So a lot of different options. And then at safety, by the way, Notre Dame's Jadon Blair and also Kinsley Ludor-Faustin from Auburn as well. So those are not only power programs, I mean, those are big-time programs that have won national championships, each and every one of those programs. So that definitely gives you some hope for sure. And the way I'm kind of looking at this, it seems to me that Missouri and Corey Batoon, the defensive side of the football, are almost saying, hey, we think we have pretty good confidence in our ability to find and develop defensive linemen on the edge, on the interior at the same time, and rotate guys, create depth as well. And it seems like Missouri has really focused on the secondary. And while obviously Missouri had a lot to replace in the secondary, it had a lot to replace everywhere on the defense, including up front as well. So I do think there was a bit of a calculation here by Missouri. Hey, let's spend a little bit more on the back end of this defense versus the front end. As we sit here today, I endorse that strategy. We'll see how it works out in 2026. And speaking of former Ole Miss players, or at least Ole Miss Rebels who have entered their name into the transfer portal, I've spoken a little bit about wide receiver Cayden Lee as well, one of Austin Simmons' best friends. And in my, by the way, my most recent podcast that came out on Monday, of course, I had an interview with Austin Simmons at the top of the program. And the new Missouri quarterback, I got the feeling talking to Austin there, I asked him about his buddy Cayden Lee and got the feeling that it was a strong possibility, and got that same feeling with Chris Graves Jr. as well. And a lot of social media sleuths out there have also pointed out that, hey, when Cayden Lee, the receiver, entered his name into the portal on social media, well, Austin immediately had some positive comments there, and that led a lot of people to thinking he is probably bound for Columbia. Certainly that's a possibility. I would also say it's a possibility he could return to Ole Miss as well, especially if by some chance the Trinidad Chambliss situation resolves itself, especially if Chambliss is ruled, hey, he can come back next season, if for whatever reason that happens in the next week or so, well, then there's a good chance he comes back to Ole Miss. But allow me to do some social media sleuthing of my own. And let me know when this starts getting creepy, by the way. But Lane Kiffin responded. Yes, our old buddy Lane Kiffin responded to Lee's announcement with a honeypot emoji. What exactly that means, I'm not sure. But generally speaking, sure seems like Lane Kiffin is throwing his honey into the pot for Cayden Lee for sure. And secondly, again, let me know at what point this starts getting creepy. But apparently Cayden Lee's lady friend apparently wants him at Florida State, by the way, where she is evidently a nursing student there. So creepy enough yet? Well, good, because that's about as far as I'm going to go with it. My point is, while it seemed like a day or two ago, I would have probably put a decent amount of money on Cayden Lee coming to Missouri, especially with Lane Kiffin throwing his hat in the ring. Now I'm not so sure. We're going to have to wait and see how this plays out. And of course, while I'm generally positive on the moves Missouri has made in the portal this offseason, well, at this point, your guess is as good as mine on how good this Missouri team is actually going to be. And I think, once again, with as many, if not more, players transferring in and out of these major programs as ever, I think you're going to see another fairly unpredictable season in the SEC and in college football next season. Now, obviously, on some level, it was a predictable SEC season. If you look at the end result, Georgia over Alabama in the SEC title game was the least surprising result of all time. On the other hand, you had a bunch of surprising things, of course, like Vanderbilt being on the cusp of college football playoffdom, for example, and of course, Indiana winning the national championship and being one of the all-time great teams on the outside of the league as well. So there's a lot that can change between, and just the predictability factor, I think, is the unpredictability factor, I should say, has just gone up, I think, exponentially, at least by college football standards. That doesn't mean that Vanderbilt and Northwestern are going to start winning the Big Ten and the SEC on a regular basis, but it does mean it's at least possible. It does mean, as other people have said, a lot of excuses have been taken off the table, especially at places like Missouri that maybe aren't, that obviously I should say are not traditional blue blood powers in the sport of college football, and yet Missouri's obviously had its moments as well. And perhaps, again, if a team like Indiana can do it, why not Missouri? That's the question. You get the coach right. Most importantly, oftentimes you get the quarterback right. Well, that makes all the difference in the world. And certainly Indiana got the quarterback right this past offseason. So your opinion of Austin Simmons is paramount here. And all the early top 25 stuff I've seen for Missouri, I've seen everything from them being unranked in like the 35 range or so, from as high as 17th to 15th. Something like that. So opinions, again, to my point there, these are expert opinions too. These aren't just randos on message boards. So it just goes to show you nobody really knows what to expect outside of maybe the very, very tippy top at this point. And with a flurry of late activity here, Missouri looks like, well, maybe it tried to slow play the offseason just a tiny bit, with, of course, Austin Simmons being a notable exception here. But maybe not as much star power in this class as before. Could that have been by design? Let's talk about the strategy for Missouri's transfer portal. And also, yes, another brutal loss for Dennis Gates and the basketball team, where really another slow start kind of doomed the team, in my opinion, last night. Let's get there in just a little bit. But first, I want to tell you about a FanDuel because, of course, well, the AFC and NFC title games are here this weekend. Of course, the big game is coming up as well. And FanDuel, regardless of what you're into, well, they have profit boosts waiting for their users all the time. And here's what I love about it. You get to use the profit boosts on the bets you already feel good about. So why not sweeten that underdog even more and, well, bring the odds down for that heavy favorite? FanDuel is the best place to get into the action all playoffs long. So visit FanDuel.com to get your NFL boosts every game day. Now, one thing most of you probably do not know about me is that I absolutely love nothing more than a good auction. Yes, an actual auction, whether it's real estate, cars, anything. The idea of that just gets me excited, and it comes from a couple places. Number one, in my 20s, I was a open outcry trader at the Chicago Board of Trade. And I mean, yeah, I'm talking the Eddie Murphy Trading Places stuff. The, hey, 4.5 for 100, sold, all that kind of stuff. So, yes, that kind of adrenaline it gets addicting without question, the money involved and everything else. But the other part of it is I also was a high-level fantasy football, baseball, basketball player, and I loved doing the auctions. And the reason this is a relevant topic here is because a lot of the elements of an auction, especially of actually a fantasy auction in this case, actually mirror a lot of the market dynamics of the transfer portal, in my opinion, because you have a limited period of time to bid on a limited group of players. By the way, unlike the stock market or a grain futures market, for example, when, for all intents and purposes, you have an unlimited amount of options. Well, that's not necessarily the case when you're dealing with, say, fantasy football or the transfer portal, where, for example, yeah, there's only 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and not all of them are very good. So obviously there's a limited amount of those guys. Same thing in the transfer portal. Every offseason, well, there's going to be a limited amount of quarterbacks, and there's only going to be a few of them are going to be desirable as starting level players at a place like Missouri. So from my experience, it's not as easy as just doing the old bromides of, hey, I'm going to do a stars and scrubs strategy, or the opposite of that, which is value-based drafting. In other words, I'm just going to let the draft come to me, not overpay for anybody. And the stars and scrubs, I'm just going to buy maybe 5 or 6 of the best players possible and fill out the rest of my roster with $1 players. Again, from my experience, it's never that simple. What you have to do, and this is why this is relevant to the portal here in Missouri, is you have to be flexible and you have to react to the market. But here's the thing, you can also force the market's hands by who you choose to bid on as well. By that same logic, Missouri wrapped up quarterback early, and I think that was the smartest thing it could have possibly done, because when it comes to the idea of value-based drafting, and hey, I'm just going to let the draft come to me. Believe me, I've screwed this up before, is my point. I've waited too long and gotten too cute with trying to just get the perfect price on every single player that eventually I ended up at the end of the draft with a whole bunch of money left to spend and nobody really worth spending the money on. Well, the point here is that that is not what happened with Missouri this offseason. Clearly, at the end of the transfer portal process here, Missouri is actually picking off some of the best players available. See, that's the positive point I'm trying to make here. I don't think Missouri got caught being too patient and getting too cute here in the transfer portal, because here at the end, they're closing on Chris Graves Jr. They closed on Zach Owens, the enormous offensive lineman from Mississippi State. Now Missouri is in there with possibly duking it out with Lane Kiffin and LSU in their deep pockets for Cayden Lee, his former wide receiver at Ole Miss, by the way. The point here is that clearly there are some good options out there, even including Damon Wilson. Heck, there may be a 10% chance Missouri could still get him back if things work out right. But the point here is Missouri didn't just get caught with just saving all of its money, that type of deal. Now, of course, in reality, this is real people's money. This isn't fantasy football money. yes, you do get to take your money into the next offseason like in fantasy football. So that's where the analogy loses steam a little bit. But my point here is that based on everything I'm seeing here, based on the fact that Missouri is closing strong, they didn't make the classic mistake of trying to get the perfect price on every player. And what you have to do, again, from my experience, is you can be patient and wait for good prices at certain players in certain positions, but especially when it comes to quarterback. If you're Missouri, I don't know what Austin Simmons got. I don't know if he was their number one guy. It seems like he was way up there. That's for darn sure. The point here is that they figured out quarterback early, and then they could figure out everything else. You really can't worry about any other position until you figured out that position. Because, and here's the thing with quarterback, the idea that, well, we're getting to the top of that market, $5, $6, $7 million. Who knows what that market's going to, I shouldn't say I guarantee, but it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if there's a quarterback who gets $10 million in next year's market. Whether that's worth it or not is, of course, up to the people writing the checks. My point is you need to figure out that market early and figure out, hey, do I have that $8, $9 million? Or do I need to play in more of the $3, $4 million area? Again, figure that out early by again, back to fantasy football. I'm going to nominate Patrick Mahomes first, or whoever the number one, Josh Allen, whoever happens to be the number one quarterback in fantasy that year. Let's put him out there. And if I get him, great. If he goes for more money than what I'm willing to pay, well, I figured that out early enough in the process that I have time to be flexible and make another move. I think, if anything, that's what Missouri did here this offseason. And you know what? I do want to talk about some Missouri basketball, another disappointing loss. Let's break down the end of the game for Missouri, the decision-making, and also, yes, I have found him. I found my least favorite basketball player in the SEC this season. So let's talk about that and more right after these quick words. So over the last few weeks, I've focused quite a bit on Missouri's starting lineup and why I definitely believe that Mark Mitchell and Sean Phillips, for example, are not the most compatible offensive lineup in the world. Well, once again, yesterday, Missouri gets off to a dreadful start offensively. In fact, for the first 12 minutes of the game, Missouri scored just 10 points. And actually, Eli Hoff over at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, STL Today, well, he had some good context here. I don't think he'll mind if I steal his graphic here for the program, but you'll see here in SEC play, here's how Missouri has started with the starting lineups. Now, Missouri was losing, has at least been trailing or at best tied in these games with their starting five. This does not include last night's game against Georgia, but obviously not a great start from Missouri there either. So the best Missouri has done, a 6-6 start at Kentucky and a 5-5 start against Auburn at home. And you'll notice not exactly burning up the nets in either one of those examples either. The Tigers have either trailed by 3, 6, and 8 in our other games, including, of course, that 8-0 start by LSU against Missouri. Now, of course, Missouri did some things right and some things wrong, just not enough right to finish the game, unfortunately. Jaden Stone actually made a beautiful turnaround jump shot in late clock with about a minute and a half left to cut the Missouri deficit to 2. Good defense by the Tigers, nearly a steal by T.O. Barrett. The Tigers get a stop there in a scramble situation. And then with 34 seconds left, Missouri ran a really good play for Jacob Cruz, by the way, made it look like Cruz was going to set a screen on the left side of the court for Trent Pierce. I wrote TP down for Trent Pierce, but Mizzou got just enough of a screen on Cruz that he knocked down that beautiful and clutch 3-point shot just in front of a trailing Blue Cane. So Missouri had the lead there with 10 seconds left. Unfortunately, though, Georgia got the switch. It looked like it wanted, drove right. The 5'11" guard is able to get an and one there on the 7-foot-tall Phillips, which frankly is a little bit inexcusable, to let him get off, to foul him, number one, and then to let him get off that shot with such ease. I mean, it's got to be one or the other, right? Either put him on the free throw line or, I mean, frankly, you got to just you don't want to foul there, certainly if you're Sean Phillips. But regardless, certainly a good play by the Georgia guard there. I'll give him credit without a doubt. But I have to say, I do wonder then with 5.5 seconds left, obviously Missouri not in a great position here. I did question substituting Trent Pierce out of the ball game, putting Anthony Robinson in for him. Robinson 0 for 4 from 3 in the ball game. Pierce, obviously one of Missouri's best shooters and scorers right now. And to me, the problem was there was sort of a similar play, a similar action ran on the left side there. But again, without Pierce being sort of that previous play with 34 seconds left gave Missouri the lead. The Tigers made it look like Pierce was going to be the one getting the ball. He was a little bit of a distraction there. Well, the two guys on that left side of the court that time were Anthony Robinson and Mark Mitchell. Neither one is really a jump shooting threat, especially the way Robinson has been shooting the basketball lately, and especially with as little time that was on the court by the time that Jacob Cruz was able to get the basketball. So what happened? Well, you notice those Georgia defenders that aren't on Jacob Cruz are leaning his way and getting up court and basically trying to take that play away. And there you saw a turnaround 30-footer. Not a great shot there, not a high percentage shot for Missouri. Also didn't like that Jaden Stone was basically running up the court with T.O. Just the spacing there didn't make any sense to me. And indeed, Stone ends up tripping over the defender's feet and taking himself out of the play. So 5.5 seconds, we get a desperation 30-footer. Wasn't exactly the Tyus Edney shot that UCLA got in 4.8 seconds, was it? Sorry for bringing that up, but I'm sorry I do compare every last second moment to that terrible, terrible moment some now 31 years ago. But since I was talking about Anthony Robinson, I did think it was interesting that Dennis Gates earlier this week before the Georgia game, well, used his time with the media to send a very pointed message to Robinson in particular. He said, quote, "We have to understand that Ant Robinson has to continue to play better for us. If he does not play well, we don't have a chance, I believe." That's about as simple as it gets, and I have to agree. Certainly, at the very least, Missouri's, well, their margin for error is basically nothing. And, in that first half, Missouri gets 11 points from Mark Mitchell, but Jaden Stone with nothing. Trent Pierce with just 3. It's just really bizarre that in a world where Mitchell is getting his offense, that we can't find any offense for anyone else. We just, and at times Missouri in the first half was getting some decent shots and for whatever reason just could not buy a bucket. Their shot making was horrific. It really was in the first half there. And by the way, speaking of horrific, atrocious, horrendous, whatever word you want to throw out there, number 2 for Georgia. I'm not even going to bother trying to attempt his first name. But Cyril, C-Y-R-I-L, but pronounced surreal from what I could tell. I mean, my goodness, he made me lose my mind at one point in that game yesterday. And what I've realized is in my relatively advanced age, now that I'm entering middle-aged here, the things that get my goat in sports more than anything, it's not so much, a missed call here and there that goes against my team. It's more when either referees or in this case a player is actually trying to ruin the game, quite seemingly. There were at least 3 long replay reviews in the second half of that ball game, and I'm fairly certain that Surreal, I should say, was involved in all of them. And I literally was yelling and screaming for anybody who could hear me or hear around me. I was going, throw him out of the game. Like, really, I'm sick of him. And I wasn't actually joking. He was making the game a farce at a certain point. And I understand that ejections are used for violent acts or just particularly egregious arguing with the officials, that type of thing. But what if you're actively trying to ruin the game, which is supposed to be entertainment, by the way, for everyone involved? When Surreal, okay, at one point, Sean, he gets a Sean Phillips forearm to the chest. It wasn't like he threw a forearm. He just kind of reaches out, hits him with his forearm. Surreal throws his head back as if he were just hit in the chin or something like that. So, okay, well, stop everything. Now we got to go to the monitor and look. I mean, I'm sorry. I get tired of the refs and the rules and how the game is set up. But at a certain point, the players have a part in this as well. If they're just going to constantly jerk their head back and forth every time somebody even so much as breathes on them, well, guess what? That's making the game a heck of a lot more boring. It makes it far less entertaining. And to me, I really think what happened to, hey, the idea that we were going to start reviewing flopping and all that kind of stuff. Like to me, this stuff actually makes the game worse. And one way or the other, it should be policed. And Surreal, well, that was a surreal performance by you in some ways, because I could not believe what I was watching and how boring that second half became when they just keep we got to go to the monitor again. Okay, well, anyway, thanks as always for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou today, and hopefully this has been a lot more entertaining than yet another trip to the replay monitor. And you know what? If you want more of me and less advertisements, I don't blame you. Check out the Everydayer Club. Click the link in the description of this podcast. $5 a month, $50 a year. And you also get access to what is called our Discord server. It's an app where you get to chat with me and all of my Locked On hosts. It's a real good time, I'm telling you. So check out the Everydayer Club, lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer. And until next time, I am John Miller. Thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou.